בשנת 2015 הסכימו 193 מדינות החברות באו"ם, ובהם גם ישראל, על 17 יעדים גלובליים. המטרה, לאפשר פיתוח כלכלי וחברתי בלי לפגוע במשאבים של הדורות הבאים. היעדים האלה נקראים היעדים לפיתוח בר קיימא, או בקיצור, SDGs. מדובר ביעדים כלכליים, חברתיים וסביבתיים. בכל העולם מדינות, ארגונים, מוסדות אקדמיים, עסקים ורשויות מקומיות פועלים היום כדי לקדם אותם. בתוכנית הזו נציג את ההשקעות הישראליות שכבר מופנות לפיתוח בר קיימא. נבחן את האתגרים הכלכליים שעוד לפנינו, ונציע מודלים שיאפשרו לישראל לא רק להצליח, אלא גם להוביל עתיד יציב לנו ולדורות הבאים. האם ישראל תשכיל לאמץ בחזרה את מודל האג"ח? בואו נראה. בינתיים, כיוון שאתגרי המימון עצומים והתקציב הציבורי השוטף של מדינות אינו מספיק למימון פיתוח בר קיימא, מדינות רבות נוספות ברחבי העולם עסוקות במציאת פתרונות ומודלים פיננסיים שמשלבים כסף ציבורי, עסקי ופילנטרופי. לרעיון הבא הזמנו את הורוקס שיציג אילו תנאים נדרשים, כגון מדידה אחידה של אימפקט לצורך יצירת אמון בין המדינה, המשקיעים והציבור, ואילו מודלים פיננסיים מותאמים כבר עכשיו במדינות ה-OECD. היי פול, אז מנקודת המבט של ה-OECD, איך נראה מודל מימון של best practice? יש כבר מדינות שמיישמות אותו בהצלחה?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, there's lots of different examples out there in terms of how a successful financing system should look that can support sustainability. But what you really want to look at is a financial system that is aligned and so supporting the sustainable goals. So you should have adoption of sustainability by your actors in your system. So your banks, they should be using things like sustainability-linked loans. Your capital markets should also be using instruments such as green, social, sustainable, and sustainability-linked bonds. You should really be looking to mobilize the private sector as much as you can to bring them into supporting your financial system and sustainability. So you want to have a blended finance instruments and structures. Blended finance instruments can be things like guarantees. Structures can be a fund. They can be a public-private partnership. And then you need to really think a bit about the government and particularly the financial regulator. So they should be adopting financial approaches towards sustainability in terms of targets, but also facilitating the mobilization of, for example, local institutional investors so that the mobilization happens in local currency, that they're also reporting on the impact and being very transparent on that. And a good example, I mean, that we're seeing, for example, in capital markets is Chile, which has said that they're going to mobilize 50% of their debt in regards to green, social, and sustainable and sustainability-linked bonds. So they've set a massive ambition for themselves. Other countries where they're looking towards mobilizing the private sector are, for example, the UK, and that's looking at working with the UK financial authorities, the City of London, to work in emerging markets, but also in terms of their domestic financial system.
איך מגדירים ומודדים תשואה על אימפקט באופן שמוסדות פיננסיים באמת יכולים לאמץ וגם לסמוך עליו בפועל?
A common monitoring and evaluation framework should be adopted in our view. That's also part of having an effective financing system. So we've got existing tools, so the OECD UNDP impact standards for financing sustainable development. And those are sort of, there's also, of course, regulatory or market standards that should be leveraged to minimize fragmentation in reporting practices and also have better alignment across the measurement of blended finance initiatives. So you've really got to recognize when you're working with blended finance and mobilizing the private sector for sustainability, the development of standards and the role of impact, which is growing massively across financing institutions. So looking at responsible business conduct, looking at financial reporting, the advancements that we've seen in environmental, social, and governance and risk management, and all those. I mean, we've got an example amongst the OECD member. So our members through the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation have witnessed basically a sort of positive spillover effects from a high quality blended finance operation. So that's kind of pushing countries into adopting those EU standards and applying them to companies and helping individuals invest in those through reporting mechanisms on the bond or in the indices that you want to follow that have got sustainability criteria.
אז למה מדינות כבר לא יכולות להסתמך רק על תקציבי ציבור למימון פיתוח?
Transitioning economies to a new economic paradigm model that addresses sustainability is very expensive, and following COVID, following a lot of fiscal constraints as well that we've seen in OECD members, including in Israel, have pushed the budgetary constraints even further up the policy agenda. So there's a recognition amongst ministries of finance, treasuries, that the private sector definitely needs to play a bigger role. So we need to bring them in because of their size, the amount of money that they have access to, but also the discipline and innovation that they can provide to projects and portfolios. So it really needs, sustainability needs to be embedded in the financial systems and in the private sector. And there's also, I mean, still a role for the private sector. That's why we need to think a bit about the right mix between them. So you should have a thorough public sector playing a role in setting standards and ambition, but the private sector needs to bring in their ability to mobilize and leverage change across financing systems.
פול, מה גורם אבל למשקיעים מוסדיים להגיד כן להשקעות מהסוג הזה?
Size and liquidity are very important. So having a system in place that you have institutional investors that are looking at projects that are above a significant size. So let's say above 500 million. So you need to have some system to aggregate lots of projects, create portfolios that institutional investors can access to, both in hard currency, but hopefully in local currency as well. That also means you need to have the credit rating agencies on board that look at the financing structures, the bond issuance, the loan frameworks that can give a positive credit rating agency, and also recognize that there's sustainability elements embedded in that, and include those when they look at the rating of the project overall. So there's also the need to have effective reporting of the projects and the portfolios. Those need to be in place. You also need to think about indices and other financial approaches that increase transparency so that the institutional investors can come in, and having a blend can also help, because blended finance is a piece of concessional but sometimes non-concessional finance that mobilizes those institutional investors. That blend normally has standards in terms of impact, and they can bring in those investors that might need those projects or portfolios de-risking through a guarantee, through a first loss. So that blend can really play an important role in bringing in institutional investors.
מה המסר המרכזי שלך לקובעי מדיניות שעדיין רואים בהון מוסדי כלי לייצור תשואה בלבד?
Well, I mean, I would say that you can have your cake and eat it with sustainability, so you can get those returns being market, but you need to increase your investor base. Now, the investor base is those pension holders. They want to see sustainability in their pensions when they look at them. And as we sort of move customers, retail, the man in the street wants to have some idea that they're working towards sustainability when they're putting their pensions to work. So that's really important, I think, for policymakers. But also, we're seeing now an increasingly shift to defined contributions.
אז איזה מסר היית רוצה למסור פה לישראלים?
Well, I think Israel's got a unique opportunity. I mean, as an OECD member, you have lots of innovation. You have an important diaspora that can help as well, and lots of sort of important technology in the water sector and the agri sector that can be helped to use sustainability, and those can grow with sustainable investment. So I would say to Israel that you could tap into the wider financing system and get access to long-term institutional investors that tend to have that long-term view, cheaper financing, and it would be great to see the use of green, social, and sustainable bonds and sustainability-linked bonds in some of the conversations. And I think we together with other OECD members can do a lot in terms of collaboration and cooperation around this topic. So encourage that sort of approach.